Please.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for having invited me here. Especially because I've learned a lot from other speakers and also from the brainstorming session with the students and with new ideas thrown out for research. So that was really food for thought. Thank you so much. We know that AI has promises to make with respect to the empowerment of human agency, but also there are some risks. And here I am exploring more the risks, okay? So let me see, okay, good. And the risks are in this big field, which is the militarized AI that Dario in so many ways already discussed. And there are certain motivations which are shared by many players in this field. These have to do with the AI speed in decision-making cycles and in battlefield action, okay? Of course, the big data, high-volume data processing, and there are hopes that you will have lower personnel requirements, hopes, and also they will be less risky for your own soldiers. At the same time, we know that AI is an enabling technology, very pervasive, because it depends only what it is capable of learning. And so if you have data, yes, okay, thank you. If you have data enough and well-defined tasks, so to speak, you can make an AI system. And so there are many application domains in the military. I will focus on these ones in red: decision support systems, nuclear command, control, and communication, and autonomous weapon systems. But there are so many more, exactly because of this malleability of AI technologies. So there is cybersecurity, biosecurity, intelligence and surveillance, recognition, as I mentioned, information warfare, and you may think of more. There is one important idea about the interaction between human beings and AI systems, is that somehow humans should keep an oversight on the, let's say here, military AI, but AI in general. And oversight, I mean here, essentially as a forward-looking idea. You have to be careful enough that certain things are prevented from happening and certain things that you would like to happen do happen, okay? And certainly there are many pushes in these directions or requirements. For example, the NATO says there are, the AI applications in the military should be developed and used with appropriate levels of judgment and care. Appropriate naturally is very vague. Responsible military use of AI. There is a political declaration which goes essentially in the same direction, covering development, deployment, and use of military AI capabilities. And then maybe the origin of all this was the US Department of Defense directive on autonomy in weapon systems, when it was required that these weapons, even though they are autonomous, they should be run under appropriate levels of human judgment concerning the use of force. So, of course, there are many related norms that do not concern the military. For example, the EU norms, I mentioned here the ethical guidelines from 2019 and the EU AI Act, and essentially the same idea. Minimize the risk to health, safety, other fundamental rights, and so on and so forth. Do not cause adverse effects, and so on and so forth. Well, you know, it's very typical of legal and also ethical norms, which want to be very general, to be very abstract, to abstract from particular domains. But not only, the point that I would like to emphasize and discuss with you is the idealization. Idealization involves distortions or something that does not take into account the real forces that play in these domains. And I mean especially idealized from psychological, social, cultural, institutional, technological contexts. And so let's look at these norms and if they can be really effective in the light of this idealization. So let's make some kind of de-idealizing step now. Huh? And so this is somehow what I would like to say about this. There are many hurdles for human oversight on these systems that have not been taken into account when writing these norms. And these hurdles, these obstacles arise at least in these three domains: human-AI interaction, the limitations of AI systems and technologies in general, and also is the fast pace of technological research and development in AI. And the normative efforts lag behind. And the conclusions, okay, let's think about if we can find some spring for action and for thought from these reflections. So let me start from the first thing, human-AI interaction. And let me mention what Dario already mentioned, and it is the Gaza targeting recommendation scenario, which has to do with reports of plus 972 about Absor and Lavenda. And I extrapolated three things here. One is from the testimonies, the declarations of the human supervisors, of the human people, the people who had to have oversight on these systems. First of all, AI speed. They say we went from 50 targets a year to 100 targets a day. And it's really like a factory. We work quickly and there is no time to delve deep into the target. The second thing is search time and also other resources, cognitive and so on, are strongly curtailed because they had only 20 seconds devoted to each target before authorizing bombing, okay? And they had to check only one property, if the target was male or not. And then there was definitely hierarchical pressure from military superiors. The view is that we are judged according to how many targets we manage to generate, okay? Is this a good environment for human decision-making? Because in a certain sense, we are talking about decision support systems here. So by definition, in a decision support system, there is a gate which is enacted by a human being who has to say, okay, no, or modified in this way. I accept your suggestion or not, or I modify it in this or that way. So we can draw on psychological literature, on biases, on heuristics, and on decision making to understand the fact that in these conditions we are likely to find automation biases. But automation bias is only a phenomenological observation. Maybe we can find more, unpack this idea of automation bias, understand some of its sources. And this is important. I have these three sources against what? The backdrop of serious hazards, because the error rate estimates for those decision support systems was 10%. So 1 out of 10, it was, so to speak, checked, tested, there was a wrong result. 1 out of 10 results. And also the collateral damage thresholds that we learned yesterday and the day before, then these are set up by states independent of any international supervision, but it looks very high from these figures that I wrote here. So, of course, let's look at this book, this airport bestseller, the Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which of course reports about the heuristic bias research in psychology and economic also decision making, and it distinguishes basically between two strategies: the analytic strategies where you ponder more but are slower and cognitively expensive, requires reflection, and also maybe for energetic reasons, you are lazy, you don't want to apply them generally. Heuristic strategies are faster, default, more automatic, sometimes emotional, and ignore part of the information to arrive quickly at the decision. But they are prone to biases, to systematic errors. So let's look at some of these. For example, AI speed was one of the elements that I emphasized, okay? And AI speed can be a trigger of heuristic bias. And we look at, for example, some of the heuristic strategies investigated by Kahneman and Tversky. For example, the first one, you draw conclusions basing yourself on visible data and ignoring what has been omitted. And of course, when you have an AI system, it's suggesting you some visible data and some other may be left on a side. Anchoring is another important thing. You use an anchor which is given to you to make a decision at the beginning, and then even if the anchor is very far away from a realistic assessment, you make adjustments getting more information, but these adjustments stay closer to the anchor and than if the anchor were not there. And also, you rely on examples that come quickly to one's mind, especially, and then imagine situation in which AI advice matches these examples that come quickly to your mind, okay? I don't see much discussion about these problems of human AI interaction into when people talk about military applications of decision support systems that are powered by AI. Well, of course, the other thing, the search, only mail, 20 seconds. It's violate, even if you want to assume that we are bounded rational decision makers, well, you do not allow the important strategy. Herbert Simon talked about satisfying instead of optimizing, but he said, okay, you have to set a good enough level for your relevant variables. Then you have to choose the first option that satisfies this level of that you within a certain time. And if no option is satisfied, you repeat the cycle. So you have to have some additional time and reduce your expectations. So the question is, of course, is if the time is 20 seconds, is that sufficient to make a good enough decision in that terrible scenario? And is mail the only relevant variable for the respect, for example, of international humanitarian law? Of course, no, not. You can make it more formal and say that one reason heuristic, so say the property of being male, but maybe another property, can give you good results only if the weight that you assign to this property is greater than the sum of all the weights of the other properties that you may want to consider. And of course, this is not the case because there are so many male civilians that are not good targets. And then, of course, there is a long history of psychological studies about hierarchical pressure. And its conformity, the opinions or directives of your superiors, or who am I? And I want to defend myself. I don't want to pit my wits against that of an AI system, who has seen so many different cases, and so on and so forth. So that's the first point. So I think there are questions that we can raise at this point. Is it possible to mitigate these biases? Are the military talking about that? But the background, the backdrop is a strong military competition for a high speed because you want to be faster than your adversary. So how you make a reasonable trade-off? I don't know, but that's something that we should think about. And maybe simply in certain circumstances, these biases will have the upper hand no matter what. So perhaps we have to consider to relinquish certain uses of AI-based decision support systems in the military. But does this require unilateral state initiatives, best practices, or we have to move on to another level, which is the level of international agreements and regulations, which, of course, right now is being eroded by the suspension or with the withdrawal of states from agreements. And also there are other important elements, is the AI hype, which will solve everything for you, and this militarization race that I've been talking about. So let me go to the second thing. Technological limitation. This is better known, and so I will be very fast on this. You can discuss many different issues in that respect, but I just mentioned most of them. The first thing, let me be clear about what I'm talking about, because AI is a very complex field, but certainly what is taking more relevance and centrality is these are like two snapshots. Okay, AI maybe 50 years ago, and AI now. So once symbolic AI, symbolic representation was very important, and so was also to some extent also more transparent to us as human users. Okay, today what is really central is machine learning, which is less transparent. So what I'm talking about, the limitations, is about this part, which is not AI in general, but is certainly the more dominant part of AI, machine learning, artificial neural networks. And so I'm talking about task-oriented machine learning, foundational models, so-called, and some of which you know very well because of the large language models, or the new talk about agentic AI, or even this hype and projections about superhuman artificial intelligence. So I told you before that there were some desiderata, normative requirements of human oversight, but I didn't say why. Many of them are based exactly on these technological limitations of AI. So for example, you know about the LLM's hallucinations, I would like to call them confabulations, or the fact that these systems based on machine learning are inherently probabilistic. So when you try to assess what is their accuracy, you can basically never say 100%. So even it's a very good system by whatever standards, you cannot exclude the possibility of a mistake, even though there are low error rate estimates. Then, of course, there is the problem of unstructured and very dynamic environments in which the brittleness of these systems may emerge. And let me recall in this respect that one of these domains in general is warfare. Clausewitz said surprise is essential in gaining superiority at the decisive point. So surprise means making something really unpredictable and change the cards on the table. Another very important thing is you are never sure, and it's becoming very important now in technical discussion, whether the system has learned exactly what you had in mind. So there is the possibility of misalignment between what are your goals and the goals that you think you have thought you have instructed the system to pursue, and instead are different in some way. So this misaligned. And then adversarial AI, with trying to find weak points, and this is an entire field, and to patch them, but reveals surprising failures of AI systems. So this is the only one that I would like to mention here. Look at this example in the lab. You have an image of a school bus on the left-hand side, then you have a perturbation which is magnified 10 times to make it visible to our human eye, and then you superimpose the perturbation on the left-hand side, and you get the modified image. Well, look at this system, which is a classifier based on AI. It was trained to recognize several types of objects in the images. The original image is classified as a school bus, and the modified image is an ostrich. For us, we are robust to that, okay? Maybe we are very weak with respect to so many other properties of AIs, but we are more robust than AI system with respect. So there is a complementarity. So that's a good reason for human oversight, because we are complementary capabilities. And then this is the other one is made in the wild, in the sense that this one was in the lab. You have a stop sign. You make the usual noise superimposed. You get the other side on the right-hand side of the other. And it's interpreted no more as a stop sign, but as a speed limit sign, while, of course, we are robust to that too. Okay, so it will be possible to exploit this for you know, just make systems make mistakes. Well, we don't know really, but how much knowledge we have to have, but certainly there is something that we have to think about. So let's look, in light of this limitation, let's look at this suggestion, which was made by the National Security Commission on AI, and a clear example of revolving doors that Dario was mentioning before. So recommendation: AI should assist in nuclear command and control, early warning, early launch detection, and so on. And the pros, what are the AI may increase reliability, reduce accident, so only the positive side, reduce accident risk, shorten processing time, and thus buy more time for decision makers, which certainly is definitely important in that area. But there are some cons to be considered too. The report is silent on this. So, but perhaps we have some lesson that we already learned and apply to this suggestion. First of all, there are no data. We have no data about real nuclear attacks, fortunately. One must rely on synthetic data, but these are generated by some model that we have in mind. So we have to rely on the fact that the assumption these models are good. Of course, the risk is very high, even if the probability of mistake is low, because risk is probability times damages. And of course, in the case of the nuclear, the risk becomes very high. And then you have to verify whether the AI gave you the right or the wrong response. And then maybe you are offsetting the expected temporal gains, and maybe you are losing more time, okay? At least when you talk about launch on warning postures, which means that as soon as an adversary launch of a missile is detected, you have to respond immediately and do not wait for the deflagration, okay? And this means that we are talking about at most 30 minutes time to make a decision, and less because you have to have all the perceptual decision first to be made, and then the real decision. And these preoccupations are not addressed in current political declarations on the fact that the decision to use nuclear weapons must be with human beings. Okay, so that was, let me just touch upon the last, the hurdles of fast research and developments in AI. And I talk about that with respect in connection with a different kind of military applications of AI. So we have talked about decision support systems, and then perceptual systems which help human beings in making nuclear decisions, okay? Here, I'm talking about autonomous weapon systems. Autonomous weapon systems are capable of selecting and attacking targets without human intervention. So unlike the decision support system, here you may get rid of human of human filtering, okay? You may, not necessarily, but you may, okay? What are the motivations for human control on autonomous weapon systems? Well, the technological limitations that I mentioned before apply exactly the same here. Huh? So they may be taking a school bus, which is an object protected in its normal uses by international humanitarian law, for an ostrich. And then, of course, it's not even a protected species, an ostrich, okay? So motivations for human control ultimately come from international humanitarian law, international criminal law, and human rights law respect. So there has to be this oversight. But things are getting worse and worse because maybe you don't have many problems about the Iron Dome, which is on the upper left-hand side, which targets rockets incoming from and covers and protects a certain area. You may have more problems about this loitering munition, which is called Harpy, which is still an Israeli production, or from these groups of drones, autonomous drones coordinating each other. But I would like to talk to you about this fighter jet. It's a relatively recent thing. But before doing that, let's say that the international community is almost unanimous with the usual suspect who have doubts about it, but about the idea that there should be a regulation of autonomous weapon systems, both for oversight reasons and also for accountability if something goes wrong. And so the International Committee of Red Cross proposed a regulation framework, which is called a two-tiered regulation framework. One is to prohibit whatever they may be, intrinsically unpredictable autonomous weapon systems, and you have to restrict the use of the other ones. And you have to have two sorts of restrictions. One has to do with the planning of the action. And so you have to restrict the scale of use, the duration, the geographical scope, the types of targets, situations of use, in accordance with the international humanitarian law and the other relevant law, international laws. And the other one is action control. Namely, it's not enough to do that before the arm is used, the weapon system is used, but rather when it's used, you have still to have human supervision, for example, to disable the system if something goes wrong, okay? You have to have the right time intervention, okay? Well, all of this has been endorsed at the UN Convention on Conventional Weapons, joint declarations by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the ICRC, and also it's been reiterated a few months ago by Antonio Guterres, who said that we should have a legally binding instrument by 2026. Okay, so and the approach is this two-tier regulation framework proposed by AI. Okay, well, now let's look at the fighter jet. These are experiments carried out technologically by the US Air Force, and what they staged here is dogfights, so confrontation, very close distance confrontation between two or more fighter jets, okay? And one of these was controlled by AI. And there was a fail-safe, so to speak, human pilot in the cabin, but never had to do anything. So it was successfully passed. So, and in this document, here you will get my slides too. I'm coming to the end. The lesson learned from these experiments could extend beyond dogfighting, and they were envisaging autonomous unmanned aerial vehicles flying alongside cruiser fighters, carrying out missions such as airstrikes and reconnaissance. Okay, well, but isn't there implicitly in this an erosion of human control? Yes, because, for example, if you think of the usual drones, we know that the takeoff landing and the takeoff and the landing is local, is not controlled by a distant controlling station, maybe 10,000 miles away, huh? Because you have to reduce the latency of the signal and so the accident risk, okay? So the question is human control of dogfight bound to be local or airstrike missions? And then in AHL, we have also the military necessity principle, as you know very well, and it might be a backdoor to give up action control. Where? In contested areas, when there is electromagnetic warfare and the control signal is perturbed, or the nearby friendly crews of either fighters are being neutralized. So I'm finished with 31 minutes. So I'm finishing really. So the main points that we have reviewed a wide range of possible applications from decision-making support through perception for situational awareness of human decision makers to autonomous weapons. And in all of them, we find problems for human control and oversight. Then there is a growing distance between norms and reality. Technological developments in autonomous weapons go fast, and the states who have these technological developments in place are the ones who oppose or sort of slow down regulation efforts. And there is not only that, but there is battlefield deployment and testing in these wars, the military powers competitions, AI hype, which is screening off all the problems that I mentioned, and the vested interest that Dario was talking so well about. So there is a lot to do, and I think that also it's time not only for the citizens in general, but also for a special class of scientists like the physicists of the 1950s, the biologists, and the scholars in chemistry, for the other to do a lot of this, and I'm putting here two great examples. One is David Parnas here. He debunked and demystified Reagan's Star Wars and this impossibility, which was very important also for deterrence, and Norbert Wiener also, who was and the last thing is we should foster on the positive side AI use for arms control and the disarmament efforts. So there are, of course, groups that are working on that, the campaign to stop killer war. The normative efforts are lagging behind. They are doing micro steps in this direction. This is the Framework Convention of the Council of Europe of last year, and recognizes finally the complexity of AI systems and difficulty overseeing them, and then you have to do things like that. Just a final word, just to say that there are family resemblances between these problems, which are aggravated by the strong competition, and other fields in which human oversight is very important. Medicine, computing, journalism, finance, to mention a few. So this framework, I hope it can be useful also to address some of the problems in these other areas which have not to do with the military. Thank you so much.